Okay, so welcome everyone to this webinar presented to you today by Earth Observation Australia, CSIRO, and the New South Wales Space Research Network. We are recording, so please note that we're recording this webinar. It brings us great pleasure to welcome Rob Green and Dana Chadwick from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory to talk to us about Australia's 2026 AVIRIS Imaging Spectroscopy Joint Campaign. Just a little bit of context before we get going. Alex Held and I have been working for some time to bring AVIRIS to Australia, and the goal's been pretty straightforward: to have world-class airborne imaging spectroscopy over Australian landscapes so that we can meaningfully contribute our research in support of NASA's various missions. And we also aim to support Australian industry and research in doing that as well. So missions like EMIT, surface biology, geology represent the next generation of spaceborne imaging spectroscopy for NASA, and of course are part of the NASA Earth fleet. So the day has come that AVIRIS is coming to Australia, and we're all very excited about it. And our collective vision for this is threefold. First, to support the Australian research community, to give our scientists and ecologists, our land managers, access to this extremely high quality data at resolutions that are meaningful to the targets that we study on the Earth's surface. And secondly, to support NASA achieving their goals, to put our research effort behind the calibration, the validation, the ground truthing, so that we can achieve mutual aims of establishing global ecological diversity mapping, supporting Australian landscapes from our tropical savannas to our alpine ash, and from the Great Barrier Reef to our very arid interiors. And third, and one that I'm pretty passionate about myself, is to get the details right, to get the algorithms humming, to ensure that this technology is deployed operationally from space, and not just over North America and the whole world, but also Australia, so that we can better characterize our vegetation, our soils, our waters. And with that, I just need to say that this is no small undertaking. What NASA is investing, what we're talking about today, and what we hope will enable in each of you that have kindly joined us today, will create a real legacy for Australia and for NASA and Australia. So we, EOA, CSIRO, and the New South Wales Space Research are proud to present this, and I'm going to hand over now to Professor Stephen Williams from the New South Wales Space Research Network, who have organised this webinar for us today. And just point out as I do that Alex Held and I are holding an expression of interest. If you have a region of interest where you've got targets that you're studying, doing field work on, and you would like to get some AVIRIS data yourself, and you have some funding, or you're intending to apply for funding to help support the logistics of the mission, Alex and I will do our best to coordinate this with you and help you make it happen. So please do get in touch with Alex and I via email, and we'll go from there. So Stefan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bradley, for that great introduction, and I'm really looking forward to the talk. I won't take a lot of time. The New South Wales Space Research Network is an initiative of the state government here in New South Wales to bring together universities, research institutions, industry partners, and government stakeholders to strengthen the state's space research and innovation ecosystem. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity to see some of this technology potentially deployed here and across Australia. And we're really happy to support this initiative. And I think, given the response, I think we may look to have a few more of these sorts of webinars, bringing capabilities and things, and really coordinating activities across the state and across Australia. So thanks, and I'll pass on to Alex to do the formal introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Brad and Stefan. Again, thanks for Earth Observation Australia and the New South Wales Space Research Network for hosting this. As Brad was saying, we've been working with Rob and Diana for a long time trying to get this happening. As you can see there, and following from Brad's description, we're really blessed to have NASA have an interest in collecting AVIRIS data over Australia of course, to support the key NASA missions, but also, I guess, to put some fantastic imaging spectroscopy data into the hands of our research community and our students, to really grow the use of this sort of usage of data, and then prepare for applications with some of the new spaceborne capabilities that are coming online. If you're into imaging spectroscopy or hyperspectral imaging, you will see that it has a huge number of application domains that are potentially of interest. And we're keen to support, of course, the fact that we are trying to do this as a global exercise in many respects, so that we have a lot of airborne and spaceborne technologies that we would like to cross-calibrate with each other. So there's some consistent systems around the world and in Australia that we can all use for continuing that research. So the joint campaign, I guess at this point, is very similar to what JPL and NASA have done in Europe and India over the last few months and years. NASA will provide the latest, one of the best AVIRIS systems. They keep evolving and improving more and more every year. NASA will also support the team that sits behind this platform, and of course process the data pretty much right away as soon as it's collected, and make it available free and open for everyone. We would like to, as part of the expression of interest that Brad mentioned, ensure that we cover as many of these different application domains as possible that you might be interested in, and send us details of what of these target areas might be. We're also going to be working with NASA partners who are very interested in also collecting some key data sets over the Australian continent that you can't get anywhere else. We are, of course, keen to also have many of you supporting the airborne collection with in situ measurements and field campaigns as possible, so that we can validate and get some additional data in terms of field data in support of this campaign. At this stage, we are considering hosting the AVIRIS team in Australia in October this year, for about 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, and look forward to actually having a really nice portfolio of sites that the team can visit and collect data over. So I might leave it there and pass to Rob and Dana, who probably don't need much introduction from many of us, but both are with the JPL imaging spectroscopy and micro devices team, and with the EMIT mission. So I might just stop there and give you as much time as possible, so that we have a bit of time at the end for questions that people might ask live. But if we run out of time, please put them in the chat. So we'll collect those, and then we can try to answer them afterwards. So yeah, thanks very much. Back to you, Dana.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bradley and Alex, for and the New South Wales Space Entity introductions. It's just a real pleasure to be here. I first visited Australia in 1977, so I go way back. I've been to Halls Creek and played two-up, just to put some context around things. But anyway, we're here because we're moving forward. Progress is being made. We're starting to look at our planet with instruments that collect a complete spectrum for every point in the image. And with that full spectrum, there's a host of new parameters we can derive with units and uncertainties to achieve new science and address applications. And that's the conversation that's been going on in background with Bradley and Alex and others about the possibility of having AVIRIS, the latest version or near latest version of AVIRIS, come to Australia. I also will acknowledge, I think Ryan Pavlik is joined us as well from NASA headquarters. He's the program scientist and program manager for AVIRIS at headquarters. So he is arranging the support from the NASA side. As this is a joint campaign with both sides bringing resources to bear to allow this to be successful. We'll bring the instrument and the team and deliver all the data and want to support the measurements. And Australia's helping us get the plane and make sure that that's there so we can pull this off. So that's exciting. But let me go on with AVIRIS and the observations, and then Dana will pick it up. So next slide, please. We're going to jump. This one we covered.
Did you want, you don't want to, we covered this one already. Yeah.
We'll pick that up at the end.
Great.
All right, so I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the sensor and campaign. I'll talk a little bit about the geology element because I was a geologist long ago, and then I'm going to hand it off to Dana to carry us through the examples we've included in this set of charts. Next. Okay, NASA uses imaging spectroscopy throughout the solar system for science and applications. It's a powerful way to decide what something is without touching it. And of course, you need that for space exploration. I happened to, JPL in the 79, we proposed AIS. I wasn't there at that time, but it first flew in 1982, and that's the first imaging spectrometer. We've been building them ever since, and AVIRIS 3 is one of the more recent. It first began flying only in 2023, so it's a very recent version of the highest quality we know how to build. Next. Again, we talked about this mutual benefits for this for a number of years. You've got extraordinary range of diversity across the geosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, which are the terminologies now being used inside NASA, if you're wondering why I'm using that nomenclature, for advancing both science and applications. And with full spectroscopy, there's room for both. You have extraordinary calibration and validation sites, and those will also be something we hope to be able to collect and use together. And then finally, I think imaging spectroscopy of this type offers the ability to convolve to all the Landsat bands, both those historic, current, and future, for testing algorithms. And just to drive home the point of the richness of spectroscopic signatures found on our precious planet, I've got one of my favorite charts down. Dana may roll her eyes, but anyway, I put all the spectra, a few from each of the major disciplines, whether it's the geosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, cryosphere, maybe not so much on this trip, atmosphere, and fire, all in the same, just showing that this planet is rich with spectral signatures to access for that new science and applications. Next. So the other exciting bit is this imaging spectrometer is the same one on the space station in EMIT. We made a copy of the spectrometer and just put an airborne telescope in front of it. So it's got that kind of engineering behind it as well, but we get much finer spatial sampling when we're on a plane. And you'll hear more about that in a minute. Next. So this is a picture of AVIRIS 3 during its development. I think it's kind of a beautiful instrument as well. We don't make them out of solid gold. I'll assure you that's just gold coating for thermal reasons. But it measures the range from 380 to 2500 nanometers. It has 7.5 nanometer sampling. It has very high signal noise. It has about 1240 cross-track samples. And we have a half milliradian IFOV, which means we can collect data depending on the altitude of the aircraft, up to 10 meters and even down to 30 centimeters. So there's quite a bit of scaling potential. You can almost take it from drone-like measurements up to surveys with the same instrument. It reads at a very high frame rate. So we will work on the aircraft without ever worrying about under sampling. I think those will be that's the main points here. And there's a pretty image cube from AVIRIS 3 collected for Aaron Hester some time ago. Next. Again, I pointed out it has very high signal noise. We have reference radiance, and the signal noise for that reference radiance showing that we're 1,000 to 1 in the Wiener, and out in this we're well over 500 to 1. We're most of the range with the atmosphere in play as well. But yeah, I think you'll be pleased with the SNR of these measurements and that 7.5 nanometer sampling. Next. Driving home the point that we can fly at low altitude as long as we have permission with the local airspace and collect high quality measurements even down to 1/3 of a meter. And this is an example near the Shift campaign site where both the radiance and the reflectance are being shown here. So really now you can visit individual canopies and fractions of canopies and address some of those scaling questions in whole new ways that are not possible maybe at 10 or 30 or 60 meters currently. Next. Many applied science domains, applications, again, critical minerals, surface geology. I know our nations now have an arrangement working together in that domain. So I think that could be an exciting area. Environmental hazards, water quality, aquaculture, precision agriculture, wildfire fuel. That's something certainly in California, well, like most of the United States now has fires. And of course, Australia does as well. And water resources, at least in regard to snowpack, may not be a prime focus from this particular campaign, but is in general elsewhere in the world. Next. So on to science and applications, again, trying to go fairly quickly so there's time for questions. I'll kick it off with the geology domain. That's the set of spectra in the center there. Next. So just as an emphasis, we've been flying a major project called GEMX, and here's a nice movie in the Western United States where we're attempting to map a large portion of the Western United States. I think we flew 460,000 square kilometers in 2025, collecting a spectrum for every point of the image at about the 10-meter scale to go ahead and get a powerful spectroscopic base map as it folds into critical minerals and economic mineral exploration. A couple examples. Here we have rare earth bearing carbonatite in California. This is validation. We can directly see those neodymium absorption features in the spectrum and map the presence of rare earths. We're also mapping in this demonstration case the mineral hectorite, which is a lithium bearing clay found in California. So there's just an example of some of the data sets we've been collecting under GEMX. An example of some of the geological application, though they're broad and varied. Next. Another interesting discovery in the AVIRIS spectral data set from last year is that we found an area with enough topaz in the matrix to show up as a spectrum from, in this case, 20 kilometers altitude on an ER2, completely diagnostic signature. We've mapped it other places as well. So things with diagnostic spectral signatures, these are high signal noise, and we can map them even at small fractional percentages. It's the fun one. Managers will understand what a topaz is. They might not understand the mineral bastnasite or hectorite. Next. The other point, and again, before I'll wrap up here, is again, this is the opportunity to test the future version incarnations of Landsat, which I know Australia is heavily connected to and investing to help with. So here's a chance to collect a data set at spatial and spectral domains that you can convolve to the Landsat bands and explore the Landsat spatial scaling, which I think range from 10 to 30 meters in the proposed Landsat Next. All right, I think that may be it for geology, and I'm going to hand it off to Dana for aquatic, I think, applications, and let her carry it on through.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rob. And thank you, everybody, for being here. So as Rob mentioned, I'm going to take us now into kind of some examples of aquatic systems and work that people have been doing there. So this is an example from the Delta X campaign, which was an activity that was funded by NASA in the Mississippi Delta region in the US. And this is an example of kind of the contributions that AVIRIS was able to make, where they were able to observe total suspended solids, vegetation types, and then help with mapping of above ground biomass, which kind of helps to understand vertical accretion relative to sea level rise in some of these dynamic environments, to help kind of understand and forecast issues related to sea level rise and encroachment. There's also been other work. This has been done by Aaron Hester over many years, looking at invasive aquatic vegetation. This is in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta in California. And so you can see that they've collected annual flight lines for quite a few years now, along with concurrent field surveys, which have been really important, and then helping them to be able to map out these different types of both native and invasive that are kind of expanding into this Delta region. And so you can see in the figures on the right here that some of these that are shown in pink here and yellow are invasives, and so they're able to kind of map those and help to advise on activities to kind of combat and remove those invasive species. This is another example. This is actually from EMIT, as of Heron Island in 2024, and just highlighting the fact that with this these types of data, you can start to identify different reef geomorphic zones. So this is courtesy of Kelly Lewis, and she was highlighting the fact here that, you know, understanding the different, you can easily kind of distinguish the differences between coral lagoons, reef flats, reef crests, and then the adjacent open ocean, which can be really valuable for, kind of, as you understand those distributions, you can make different types of conservation decisions around those different regions. Moving on from there, I did just want to give an example also of kind of some of the atmospheric observations that we've been able to make. So AVIRIS 3 has done a lot of observations over the past couple of years where we've been able to observe plumes of methane and CO2 emissions associated with various industrial activities and power plants. This can kind of give you an understanding both of those emissions as well as kind of the activity of some of those areas. And then moving on to ecosystems. So this is near and dear to my heart. I'm a terrestrial ecologist and biogeochemist by training. I wanted to highlight a variety of work that's been done by a variety of people. So this is an example of flights that have been going on for many years in California, which is called the Western Diversity Time Series. These figures that I'm going to show are made by Fabian Schneider, Phil Townsend, and actually Ryan Pavlik has been really involved with this as well. So this is the kind of oblique RGB image from those AVIRIS data that were collected. And they've done a ton of work to map out functional diversity across this landscape. And so this is an example of cellulose, chlorophyll, and non-structural carbohydrate concentrations as a three false color image. And then in addition, this is another kind of set of traits, including LMA, nitrogen, and phenolics. People have also been doing work looking at other as well. So this is an example of genetic diversity mapping. This has been done by Ben Blonder at UC Berkeley. And so what he's been focused on, as well as a variety of his team members, has been thinking about not only can we just map where aspen are in particular, but also the ploidy of aspen. So aspen are both diploid and triploid. And what they found is that they're actually able to map out across this landscape where diploids and triploids are occurring specifically. So this is a very cool application from landscape genetics perspective, and also, taking genetic samples can be very expensive and very time consuming to handle properly. And so this is a very cool tool in their toolkit now as they're thinking about scaling these things up. I also want to highlight an activity that we did several years ago, which was called the SHIFT campaign, which Rob mentioned previously. So this was a campaign where we flew AVIRIS repeatedly over a portion of the Santa Barbara coast region. So you can see here that this is the flight coverage. So we had, in many cases, a very large amount of coverage. We flew every week for 13 weeks in order to capture phenological change associated with kind of the dry down period that occurs in this Mediterranean climate from February into May in that region. And so what you see on the right is actually just from a single plot over time, the changes that you can that occur in the spectra that you get from in blue, like a very green vegetation, and all the way through into red, where you have this more senesced vegetation. And you can see that a lot of these changes are non-linear through time, which is pretty interesting. One thing that we did here was we did a lot of in situ collections. So this was, as Alex mentioned, there's a huge amount of value in collecting these types of data to develop algorithms that allow us to expand our understanding of traits and species across large areas. And so this was an example where we were doing all these red dots on the figure on the left are for one of the preserves where we were doing a lot of these sample collections. And this is also a really awesome opportunity for students to get involved and to kind of start to understand the value of these types of data and really get engaged. So I really think that these airborne field campaigns are just a fantastic learning opportunity as well. And this is an example of one of the maps we were able to create after this campaign. So this on the right is a GIF of week by week moving through how the functional traits are changing across the landscape, where you have red is leaf mass per area, green is water content, and blue is nitrogen content. And so you can really see that kind of over the course of the time that we were doing that sampling, that you transition from this really kind of blue-green looking landscape into this much redder looking landscape as things kind of dry out and senesce for the year. We've also been doing a variety of activities that are related to agriculture. So this is an example of one where we've been working with Katie Gold at Cornell, as well as a variety of collaborators within Cornell Agritech and the associated USDA Center, which is the US Department of Agriculture, to think about how we can leverage these data to understand crop disease and potentially early detection of crop disease, as well as understanding of different types of varietal mapping, understanding drought stress, a variety of these types of things that are really interesting for farmers. And so this has been a really nice collaboration because this is part of our, this is an extension program where the folks who work at this, at the Agritech Center really engage with the communities as well. And so there's a lot of ability to have kind of a dialogue go on. And so these types of interactions, I think, can be really powerful and valuable. Another area kind of in the vegetation-ish realm is kind of thinking about wildland fires. So of course, as you dry down vegetation, you end up with increasing vegetation fuel, fire fuel. And so that is kind of one aspect of pre-fire understanding that you can get from AVIRIS 3 type data. In addition, you can map out smoke properties as well as fire energy, depending on the channels of the spectrometer that you're using. And then you can also go back after burns and look at burn severity, which can inform things like landslide risk, and then also monitor ecosystem recovery. So you can see here that this is the difference between a healthy canopy and then what happens post-fire, where this is this is all burned vegetation here. We've also been doing additional work with the FireSense activity, which is a NASA-funded project, and been thinking about how we can help more with active fires. So this is an example on the left of a fire temperature retrieval. So understanding in Kelvin how hot these fires are. Also, we're starting to be able to detect potential CO2 enhancements associated with the kind of burning and smoke that's being emitted from that fire. We've also started to be able to detect phos-check signatures. So phos-check is a fire retardant that is dropped from aircraft. And so these are the lines where that fire retardant has been dropped, and there's some pretty distinct spectral signatures that you see on the bottom right, which will allow you to observe where those are. And so this is kind of an interesting application where you can understand how long that phos-check stays present for and exactly where it was deployed. Again, this is another area where we're able to convolve to Landsat Next or historic Landsats or sentinel bands or various types of things where you can kind of do intercomparisons and understand transferability of different types of algorithms, as well as the understanding that you're getting from different types of multispectral sensors. So there's a lot of kind of useful utility in having this spectroscopic data for kind of relating a lot of these different multispectral instruments. And then I don't want to take too much more time because I do think that having a good amount of time for questions would be great, but I do want to highlight some of the exciting opportunities associated with airborne campaigns, or at least the things that I think are really exciting in particular. The first one that I'll highlight is the fact that we're doing real-time data collection tracking from AVIRIS now, which can really help with in-situ collections, the in-situ data coordination itself to help with algorithm development. I also am particularly passionate about building these cross-disciplinary collaborations and really having these be student learning opportunities. I think there's so much opportunity for development in a field setting that's very tangible for people, and I think it really helps to bring people into the field. And then finally, you know, there can be a lot of opportunities for community partnering and education, and so you know, all of these things kind of can come together, I think, sometimes in these campaigns. Oops, and there's a surprise other person. So an example of this is in the case of the agriculture focused campaign that I mentioned previously. We were using a tool that I've put the link to here, and I'm sure we can drop into the chat as well. But this is a tool where you're able to actually see where the plane is in real time. And there's a Starlink installed on the plane, which allows us to basically in real time downlink preliminary RGB false color data products, as well as some additional different types of data products, depending on what the interest area is of the acquisition. So this can be super helpful if you're trying to collect data in the field, for example, and so let's say that your field site was right under this cloud. Well, you might not want to collect data there. You might want to go, you know, move a little bit further and be sure that you're collecting data somewhere that was clear. Your in situ data somewhere that you got clear airborne data. So there's a variety of kind of very useful things that you can do with this. An example of that was when we were using this in the AVIRIS for Acres campaign last summer. And it's also just such an awesome communication tool because this is on a public website. And so, you know, we had people who own small farms all throughout this area who were logging onto this site to see when the plane had passed over, and were very interested in kind of understanding then, like, what were the data going to be used for and how could they, you know, get involved. So this is, I think, a really awesome public engagement tool, as well as very valuable to folks who are working on that in situ comparison. Another example of how this can be used is that they've been doing a bunch of work with the FireSense campaign for active fire management. So these are a series of examples where they were basically reflying the same area over and over again. So as you move through these time steps, these are subsequent overpasses that are being captured, and you can see how these fires are evolving over time. And you know, these are maps of the fire temperature that you can see here. And so this can be really useful to fire managers as they're making decisions, especially in kind of controlled burn situations, but also in cases where you happen to start observing a wildfire, where it can help for decision making. So this is another area that I think is you know, very exciting about this, is just being able to do this like detailed coordination with in situ data acquisition for calibration and validation. Something that I'm really interested in is thinking about how we expand our vegetation algorithms to be kind of inclusive of vegetation types that exist across the globe. So as we think about moving towards global imaging spectroscopy data, that we can really have this global perspective of how our ecosystems are functioning. And so if any of you are interested and excited about that, I'd be super interested to hear what you guys are thinking, because this is really kind of one of my passion areas. And then, you know, not to overly belabor this point, but I really do think that it's a fantastic opportunity for collaboration, training, and community building. And so, you know, I'm more than happy to talk with anyone about, you know, kind of how we've set up campaigns in the past and think about how to get the most out of these data as they're being collected. So with that, I think we're actually about at the content that we wanted to share. So we really should have hopefully plenty of time for questions and discussion, would be my hope. And I guess I had this at the end again in case we wanted to bring this back up for a reminder, but also happy to have a discussion.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, you, Alex.
Fred, go ahead. Well, thanks very much, Dana and Rob. That's fantastic overview. Got me thinking a lot of really interesting applications, and I think the engagement of students and university groups, and especially also advice on the, as you said, on field campaign coordination, that might be really handy for us to then share in the future when we have this locked in. The other thing I was thinking about, I mean, if we manage to do this over 6 weeks, That's in October is the spring in the southern part of Australia. So like people could think about revisiting a test site more than once at the beginning and at the end of the airborne campaign because that's a very
Absolutely.
active phenology time of year for many crops and ecosystems. So just putting it out there for people to think about what can be done over 6 weeks. Brad, any more questions, or should we open for questions?
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, Dana, the first question that popped up was if you would mind explaining a little bit. Now, I did see some of this in your presentation, but I think for the broader community generally, is there, or could you just briefly describe the pathway from scaling from the AVIRIS data to the future satellite missions? In many of your examples, you showed it, but perhaps if you could break it down just a step further for people, that would be great.
A lot of different pieces to that.
Yeah.
Certainly. It depends a little bit on what you're interested in observing. If you're interested in kind of scaling from a reflectance perspective, then thinking about how you might aggregate pixels and what the temporal relationship is between when you got that airborne data and when you have an overpass of satellites. We have some really nice matchups that we were able to do that are within seconds of each other, of AVIRIS 3 flying and EMIT passing over, which is always a really exciting way of understanding the dynamics of scaling. If you're thinking about scaling with different types of algorithms, I think some of those things are open questions, which I'm, especially for vegetation again, because I'm biased, but I think is a really interesting area that we're really excited about thinking more about, and is something that, in my research hat, I've definitely been working with a team to think about, how do we take these algorithms and be developing them at the airborne scale, and then how does that really scale functionally up to a spaceborne sensor, and kind of at what cover level can that work, and how do we solve all these problems, because we're getting more and more spaceborne data and it's only going to be growing. So how do we take these next steps? I think is part of the exciting thing about doing campaigns like this, is that we're starting to be able to answer some of those questions. I'm not sure if that really got to what that person was trying to start with, but and also so. Rob, please jump in. I was just
yeah, Rob, if you've got any comment.
Yeah, I think there's clear spatial scaling. We can collect data down to 1 meter or less, and you can scale it up to 10, 20, 30 meters or coarser. And then spectral scaling, we can match any wavelength multispectral bands within reason in the V-square range from planet to Landsat to Sentinel. So those are the sort of, you can do direct algorithm scaling and spectral scaling and spatial scaling, I think, with this kind of a data set.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Carl, did you want to go next with a verbal question? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. And hi, Rob. Hi, Dana. This is great. Thanks for this. It's really great to see your presentation. And thanks, Alex, for pulling this together as well. My question for you is maybe we can dive into how this actually would work. If you're doing a campaign in October, that might work with some of our activities where we're doing data collects over, for instance, for wheat fields, doing some disease and nitrogen sampling and things like that. How do we actually make this work, and how do you bring the users on board? And I think I saw something about we need to have an Australian aircraft for the instrument. How do we go from this step, which looks fantastic, to implementation and planning and execution?
So the short answer is, can you see the expression of interest now on the share? Is send us an email, and Alex and I will help coordinate with the team to see if we can make a flight over your region of interest possible. Dana and Rob, did you? Wait, sorry.
And then you need to coordinate with the field relevant field teams. Make sure that they're on site, ideally at the same time, or shortly before and after the flight. But I guess from our perspective, we're letting the individual research groups coordinate their own field campaigns. This campaign wouldn't get into the coordination of the ground field work per se. But you would get a date
Yeah.
and a time when you get the flight over your site.
Well, and I guess oftentimes we'll do weather assessments like oftentimes the morning of, and have a communication out about what the flight plans are. So we would be trying to stay in a general area, but if we can tell you're going to be clouded in, we're not going to, we're not going to be flying that area. So, we have used WhatsApp quite a bit in the past for coordination of like when are flights happening. And then, the beauty now of having some of these websites available is that you can also see where the plane is it coming now? Is it coming, like how far is it? Like where is it on its flight path? So, and then I guess your question about, I think the aircraft itself is going to be from the US, but needs to get transited to Australia. Rob, I don't know if you want to say more about that, but it's not, we don't have to have an Australian aircraft if that was the question.
Much like the European and India campaign, the host country is really in charge of coordinating the observations, and we want to work with you. We want to do the experiments together, but it's your country, they're your sites, you know them, you should be planning, and then we'll get on board, because almost all the sites you're interested in will have a common link to something that NASA will be interested in. There may be one or two where we'd say, well, NASA would really love to get the Daintree or something like that. I don't know, as an example, but to a very large degree, this is in the hands of your leadership to figure out how to take advantage of this. NASA will make its contribution, and then Australia will have its contribution. Together, we make this a success, and that's very much how it worked with both Europe and India in the last few years.
Thanks, Rob. And Alex has gone viral, relatively speaking, in the chat with his question about mentioning the level of processing that JPL will do with the AVIRIS data that you're collecting. And I guess it's probably a good segue to explain for people how then they would access the data and the curation of the data after the event.
You're going to have real-time data. You're going to see what's acquired. You'll have the quick looks, hopefully real time, as it's being acquired. Depending on what's needed, we can get quick data off the plane that has preliminary calibration if you need it quickly to do something. But the bulk of the data will get processed back on the high-powered computers at JPL, and we'll deliver calibrated radiance, geolocated. You can go to the Ornal DAC to see what that looks like. There's a bunch of AVIRIS 3 data. It'll all be available to everybody. It's an open data policy. And then we will also have a reflectance product, which uses our very latest reflectance algorithms to compensate for the atmosphere and deliver you reflectance. There may be some byproducts, like canopy water and some other things that get generated along the way. We can have conversation about those, but the core products are the radiance and the reflectance. And then there's so many open source algorithms, including from our mineral processing chain for emit, that you would have access to adapt and apply depending on which path and which environment, which application you're pursuing, would be my answer.
Yeah, and I'll just add, there's been a lot of trainings that have already been developed for using AVIRIS data for a variety of different, applications. So as Rob mentioned, the Oak Ridge National Lab DAC is the data archive that has hosted these data, and they have been really great about providing, tutorials and resources and things like that. So those are things that we could, easily make available. I mean, they are publicly available, but we could send you the links to them to make them even more available. And then just to give you a quick sense, this is an example of like the shift site here. So this is a particular campaign, and you can see like the different data that are available here. And so this would be kind of the interface that you could use in order to find different types of data products that are available. If that's, I'm not sure if this is exactly what you were asking, but that's where like you could find the radiance and reflectance data for the whole campaign.
Full copy can be provided to any archive you wish in Australia for whatever use you wish. So the data are open, and we can, whatever makes the most sense. We're just describing the path that we would do that immediately results in a fully open data set. But if there's a reason, and you could think about desires to have this data set locally, to do some combined analysis, that's completely within scope as well.
Yeah, thanks, Rob and Dana. I think we covered quite a number of questions about it in the chat as well, from different perspectives on answering that one. So thank you. Fred, we're going to go to you now, and then we've got some more online questions after you.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very interesting. I'm a member of a consortium which involves, I think, 5 Australian universities and 2 NASA groups, and we've been working together for a few years to start a project called IGNIS. And the purpose of IGNIS is to detect the triggers for wildfires and to support wildfire management. The way we're doing, we're starting with an airborne campaign. So for the airborne campaign, we're using a ground-based lightning mapping array, which has been provided by Marshall. And that will then transition into an airborne-based instrument, and also a thermal sensor over the 2 to 12 micron range, and that's being provided by Goddard. So we've had folks from Marshall to come and install the ground-based lightning mapping array. It's operating as we speak, and so is the airborne campaign as we speak. So we're doing the ground truthing with the airborne campaign. So we're flying over during storms and lightning events to see what the ground-based sensor array is detecting. So this will be a multi-year project. We expect the ground-borne campaign will operate for a year, and then we'll have the thermal sensors installed on the plane. And the idea is to transition to something on LEO, a small satellite in LEO. The project is running out of Edith Cowan University in Perth in Western Australia. And the reason for that is because that's basically where the chief investigator is located, and because Western Australia has more money than the other states to do this type of work. It's all a question of funding, right? In the ideal world, we will conduct 3 campaigns, one out of Western Australia, one out of Adelaide, and one somewhere out of New South Wales, like Canberra, monitoring the areas that are subject to wildfires. I think we'd be very interested in AVIRIS and in the opportunities it provides in collaboration and in cohort with the other instruments that we're currently running. So I'll bring that to the attention of our team, and we'll be further in touch with you. As I say, it's a wonderful program. The support from NASA has been exceptional, despite changes in their head offices beyond their control. Let's say the Goddard group has been particularly impacted by that, but the support has been wonderful. And the question of planes, Edith Cowan University has its own flight school, and so we have trainee pilots who are flying the planes. The planes are modified to take the instruments on board, and that's been very successful so far. And we, as I say, anticipate this continuing into the future, again, subject to funding.
Great, thanks, Frank. I've flown one of your Edith Cowan planes, by the way. I used to live in Perth.
I'll just chime in. That sounds like a
Yep.
perfect match. And I would say an area where the AVIRIS vegetation, we really like to contribute in understanding the fire fuel side of the fire cycle, because we think that's a real opportunity, as well for the future spaceborne imaging spectrometers, where you could refresh the fuel every 16 days or so and use that in models to make decisions about mitigation. And when fires start, stand up real-time models to optimally deploy resources as you try to combat that fire. Because of course, in JPL, we were impacted by terrible fires, as I know have hit you in Australia, both next to JPL. We had 150 JPLers lose their homes, and people died adjacent to the lab, and then also the Palisades fire as well. So we're really keen for that connection. I think we have a program called FireSense. In fact, with AVIRIS 3 and that real-time product, we have documented evidence that people on the ground looked on their cell phone, saw a real-time product of fires, and made decisions to deploy equipment to combat fires and stop fires from starting. In fact, and save structures, because they were able to use that real-time data to deploy their resources more optimally. So we've got some real feedback that this approach can help, and it's of course important to both our nations so much.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and thank you for that. When you work and speak with engineers, they get very excited about building kit, but really it's the end user which controls, whether the thing is useful or not.
We've been working with cell phones, watching the fires and making decisions because they're sitting next to where that fire started.
Yes, we've been working with emergency services and the Met Bureau, but the weakness is getting the data into end user form for people to look at in the field. And I think that's the area we really need to improve on ourselves.
Mobile phone screen is a good place to put it.
Yeah, but much of Australia in areas of interest does not have mobile phone coverage. Yeah, so that's yeah. Thank you.
So just going back to, thanks, Frank. Fred, sorry. Just going back to the online questions. A lot of people are asking about the interaction and how to get involved, whether they need to do the field work themselves, whether they need to get funding. The answer to all those questions is yes, and we can start that process by sending Alex Held and myself an email. We're both very easy to find on the internet, so that should be pretty straightforward if you didn't pick up our emails from the slide we've been showing. The big question, I guess, that keeps coming up on the chat is about cost. So I would like to say this is a collaborative effort, and we are looking to raise funds on both sides of the Pacific Ocean for your campaigns. NASA is doing their part, and whilst they're here, we're attempting, and when I say we're, Alex and I are attempting to help coordinate domestic applications, and that of course means flying a sensor that that we like to have optimum conditions for, and we have a limited time frame. So in your concept of cost, I think you need to take that into account as well. It's not like we're selling a service with a square kilometer cost associated with it. We have a logistical cost of waiting for the ideal conditions, moving around the country to get as much done as possible. So we'll be trying to weigh up and balance that. Rob and Dana, who obviously do this a lot more regularly, would you like to comment on any of those aspects for us, or Alex? On the logistics?
Yeah, maybe the experience in Europe and in India. I mean, how did those missions go, and how was the local community brought together? I guess would be interesting.
There was a strong leadership in the case. We had the University of Zurich with Michael Shepman and Andy Huini, who ran the campaign. They coordinated with all the investigators. They pulled the resources required from that side of the contribution together, and they directed the campaign. So there would be morning calls based on where the plane is, where it's clear, where it was going to go next. And you don't get 100% success. You don't hit every wicket. So you do have to have some uncertainty and acknowledgement. We're dealing with weather. The dominant factors are clear sky conditions. Then is there an issue with the aircraft? Typically there's not. And then is there an issue with the instrument? Typically even less frequently. So in order, it's all about the weather in my experience. And the same was true in India. ISRO, it was their plane. The ship to AVIRIS installed on it, and they ran the show. They were very strict. Of course, they had an observer. They were very strict about every flight that was collected. And they did a similar, we did sort of a round robin around India, collecting the various sites that they had pulled together with their community as their priorities. And they had independent internal funding mechanisms for both for the in situ, and of course ISRO, it's their aircraft. They had arranged the funding to cover that aircraft. So those are the models that we've seen and can work.
Okay. I think in our discussions, we've talked about, from a most practical and technical perspective, it's most logical to have the same aircraft that has flown for you in the US and other sites do this work. So we would have to cover some of those costs, as you say, on a day-to-day basis, but also probably the cross-Pacific flight to bring the whole thing to Australia and fund it for 6 weeks. So as I said in the chat there, we're looking for larger chunks of funding to help us underwrite and sponsor the campaign. And based on what we can bring together, there will unfortunately have to be a small amount that might need to be applied to each individual request. But again, it's a bit of a variable scale at this stage until we have a bit more of the large funding secured, and we can then calculate some sort of daily rate or per flight line or something like that. I don't know how you do it in terms of sort of pro rata costings and stuff like that, but I assume it's probably the same.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the ESA. ESA was the anchor tenant to fund the European campaign, and then there were other people who contributed to. So that's a similar. You sort of, it's helpful to have an anchor tenant. And in the case of ESA, they also use the same aircraft. It turns out AVIRIS 3 is already installed on the B200. So there's a lot of paperwork in installing an instrument or a new plane that gets quite complicated. So it is most streamlined, particularly looking at October, just to stick with the plane. The instrument demonstrated to work spectacularly on this plane. It's ready to go. It can get to Australia and back, which is also important.
Yeah, that's good. A question I guess I had also, when I guess you probably need to talk to the aviation company, but what's a good final go no go decision time we need to give you guys in the US to go ahead or not for this campaign, because that probably depends on how quickly people can budget for the next financial year in October, and whether those budgets can be done before, let's say, 1st of May or 2nd or end of May or something. But happy to.
I think we can be very, very flexible. It should be, I think you should take the lead in talking with Dynamic Aviation. I know you've been contacting them and figure that out. I think Ryan's here, but I think we have the period free for AVIRIS 3 on the B200 starting in September-ish for probably 3 whole months. So we can be quite flexible, but I think it will really be up to you and conversation with Dynamic Aviation.
All right, so let me assume then we have to make a decision by June, end of June, which is our fiscal year end. By then, I hope everybody and we can find the funding, but most people can budget for their flights and their costs for next financial year. That's June is the end of our fiscal year, so let's make that assumption, and hopefully we get expressions of interest between now and say April, May, so that we can then start budgeting the whole thing. Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, and that helps answer the question from Alicia in the chat about when the EOI closes. My answer was perhaps a little bit more dynamic in that, as we mentioned, obviously, you know, we might be sitting at airports for days waiting for those optimal weather conditions, and that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes with airborne research, and so you have to take that into account as well. You know, with your field work and the things that you're doing, we will do our very best to achieve everything we can in making it happen. But of course, we also have you know, priorities, national priorities, international priorities, and NASA's priorities to deliver on. But honestly, I can't say any more on that, other than that Alex and I won't give up in helping, and I'm sure Robert and Dana won't either. So thank you everyone for attending. It was really great, and I think a very honest and clear communication of what you do, and how we get the jobs done. And yeah, I want to thank everyone else for joining in as well. We had a lot of registrations. We got about half in attendance from all the registrations. So certainly people are keen to hear about it. We've had many kind words also in the chat, and that's an hour. So I am going to say goodbye to everyone. And Stefan, did you want any last words?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank Dana and Rob for the fantastic presentation. I think the opportunity is really exciting. We will circulate some of the copies of slides and a recording once those have been okayed on the NASA side. We will also follow up with some more details about the EOI and timeframes for that. So keep an eye on your inbox if you did register. We have your coordinates, and so we'll send through some follow-up details. And we'd be happy to field any questions or feedback you might have. But thanks.
As we close, I want to acknowledge Larry James is here. He's the former deputy director of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I've collaborated with him for quite a few decades. It's quite exciting. He's now based in Australia, helping, I think, in a range of interesting areas. So it's a pleasure to see you, Larry. And I want to chime in, if there are any connections with the space industry in Australia that would like to do something with imaging spectroscopy, I'm completely open to those conversations. This has been airborne focused. We're going to make this an amazing success, but there are lots of different paths forward where measuring these type of spectrum of space can make huge contributions. So we didn't talk about that. It's not the topic here. I'm after the hour anyway, so if this is okay. But please reach out if there's anything in that domain that's of interest, both from Earth, Moon, Mars, asteroids. It's all fair game for spectroscopy.
Great. Thanks very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you all so much.
Bye,
everyone.
Great to see you, Larry.
Thanks, Dana.
Take care.
Yep, same here.
Bye.